We've saved about $1.5 million. Can we actually retire early and enjoy it? Today, we're diving into a real world case study with a question I hear all the time. Can I actually retire and enjoy it? Now, this couple we're looking at is in their mid 50s. They have one child that's still at home, and they've done a lot right. They've saved diligently. They've built up a solid investment portfolio, and now they're staring down the big decision. Can we afford to walk away from work and not look back? Hey, I'm Jim Martin. I'm a financial planner and the founder of Martin Wealth Solutions. And I met this couple a few months ago from my podcast, Smart Wealth and Retirement. And they're great people. And like a lot of folks, they're asking all the right questions. What about healthcare? How do I handle that if I retire early? What if we still have a mortgage? Do we need to pay that off before we retire? What if we want to remodel the house? What if we travel a lot more than we planned? What if we love retirement way more than we expected to and it gets way more expensive? And maybe most importantly, how do we do this without ever having to go back to work? Now, these are real questions real retirees ask all the time. They don't just ask, what's my rate of return? So today's format, what's going to be a little bit different. I'm actually going to share the financial planning software we use in our office, run through the data, and show you how all the pieces fit together in real time. So let's go behind the scenes of a retirement plan, pull back the curtain, and I'll show you what it really takes to retire early and stay retired. Right. So now we're into the financial plan. We're taking a deep dive into our case study with Mike and Susie. Mike and Susie are great people. I've changed the names to protect the innocent. But if they're watching this, I did let them know I was going to share this on a YouTube video. Again, we met them on a podcast. I'll go over that a little bit later if you want to do a deeper dive into what this is all about. But let's go over their data. Let's go over their numbers so you have a firm understanding of where they're at. And we'll talk about where they're going. And I'll walk you through some of the things I look at as I'm beginning to plan out and make sure somebody's on track to retire early and ultimately stay that way. So we'll start with our blueprint. Look, net worth wise, they're $2.2 million. So they've done great. Mike is 55, Susie's 51. And hey, Mike has a traditional IRA, or I'm sorry, a traditional 401k with 916,000 in it. Also has a Roth with about 215. And then Susie has an investment account. I think I need to change this. Oh, no, it's a 401k. So she has money in a 401k. And we've went through and adjusted the model portfolios based upon where they're at today. When we initially met them, they were much more conservative than this illustrates. But at this point, they are in a mix of 68-32. And as we go through here and we take a look at their other investments as well, we also see that they've got a joint investment account. They've got a Roth IRA, but they have a mortgage. And one of the big questions that came up was, hey, Jim, what do we do about the mortgage? Should we pay that off? And I think a lot of people, they're going to ask that question. What do I do with a mortgage? Should I pay that off? Should I keep that through retirement? And I think like a lot of things in life, the question depends. Number one, we want to see what your proximity to retirement is. And, they're a couple years away. We'll get into that in a second. But we also want to understand what your interest rate is. And does this impact your ability to actually save? Look, I'm a Dave Ramsey SmartVestor Pro. I don't love debt. But at the end of the day, their loan rate is incredibly low. I think it's 2.25, 2.5, something like that. So really low rate. So what we do is what's called an arbitrage play. Okay. And what an arbitrage play says is, hey, should we take money from one source in order to pay another source off? And is there a net gain associated with that? So meaning that if your mortgage rate is 2.5%, but you can get 3% on cash, why not leave the money in cash and make that extra 0.5% spread, that arbitrage play? So in this case, the decision we've come to is yes, they have the capital in this joint account. I call this the financial freedom account. This is a great account, especially for those who want to retire early, because we can control your taxes here. But at the end of the day, our recommendation to them was, why don't we keep the mortgage until you retire? And then whatever's left, we're going to leverage this as a sinking fund and then pay those dollars off at that point, which I think was the smart move in their situation. But that's not always the advice we give. There's some people that just don't want it. Like, let's be clear. there's two parts of financial planning. There's the finance side, so whatever the math is, and I'm a math guy, so 1 plus 1 equals 2. But there's also the emotional side, and some people, they just don't want to carry debt in retirement, which I get as well. So let's also dive into asset allocation because I think that's another important thing that people need to consider is, hey, how much risk should I be taking on my money? And I think it's natural for people as they get closer to retirement to say, I need to pull back the reins considerably on risk in my accounts. But each one of these accounts is going to have a different risk profile because we have different time horizons associated with each one of the accounts. We'll look at the joint account first, and we made a decision to really pull back the reins here a little bit from a risk perspective because this is likely the first account that we're going to leverage in retirement in order to potentially keep some ACA subsidies if they still exist after, that we get through the arm wrestling with the big beautiful bill and everything else. But also give them flexibility in retirement to keep their income low and potentially consider some Roth conversions or some other tax opportunities as well. So inside of this account, we kept their risk a little lower, which I think is really important when we're making these considerations. When we look at some of the other accounts, though, let's look at the Roth. We're more aggressive in the Roth. Like we're risk on in the Roth. And why is that? Well, for this couple, and again, I think it's really important to pause right here and give you some disclosures. These aren't recommendations for you. This is just for informational purposes only. Anything we're going to talk about relative to rates of return or what we're doing today is just illustrating what we've done in the past for this very specific, very custom plan and approach. But for their purposes, we kept 98% in the market and 2% in cash because again, our time horizon on the Roth is very long. And I think this is one of the things that's really important as you're beginning to think about how do you build your investment plan is just making sure that you understand that not every dollar needs to be invested exactly the same way. And that's one of the mistakes that we tend to see in financial plans is people have all of their dollars invested exactly the same way. So be very careful as you're impacting or making decisions relative to your investments that maybe not every dollar has to work exactly the same. Uh, with that said, if we look at, we look at Susie's IRA or investments, it might be different than her husband's. She's 70/30, meaning she's a 70% in the market, 30% fixed, and he's 60/40. He's more conservative, and people that are more conservative, they're going to have a different approach. Not every couple is exactly the same. I'm different than my wife, and you're likely different than your spouse as well. So I think that's important to know. Let's look at the family tab because I think that's important. Um, they've got a 16-year-old daughter going to be going to college. They want to help with that. Uh, Mike's 55, Susie's 51. Okay, so they have great incomes. They've been saving a lot of money along the way. They're going to have Social Security. They also have savings. They're at the point where because they're going to be cash flow in college that they've decreased the amount of money that they're throwing into their 401ks because they're going to need to cash flow that college. They don't want to go into debt. They want to have a big piece or a big part of paying for their daughter's college education. When we get to goals, and we'll talk about this as we go through here, we look at their retirement ages. And Mike initially said, hey, I want to retire at 55. And Susie said 50. I'm sorry, Mike said 58, Susie 55. And they think they're going to need around $6,500 a month for retirement expenses. That's just keeping the lights on. But there's some things that we've got to fill in, and we'll talk about that today as we kind of go through here. And then the college goal for their kid. And by the way, I've got an 18-year-old that went to school. I was shocked at how expensive college is. So you might see $37,000 and have a heart attack, but that's not the case. Their daughter wants to go to Clemson. This is the cost for Clemson in state. So they're in state. That's what that would run. So let's kind of go to our retirement tab and really dive in to how do we game plan this and how do we really make decisions around retirement for a couple? So right now, based upon everything they're in, they have a 100% probability of success, but we've not factored everything in yet, which I think is really important. Um, let's take a look at some of the factors that could cause a plan to either work or even potentially not work. So again, Mike said 58 years old. The math works right now, right? Like when we look at it, that math works. And his wife said 55 and that math works. But what we've not factored in is some things that I think are really important. When we're going to do planning horizon, by the way, and we'll kind of go through each one of these tabs so you can see how it affects it. We're going to do planning horizon. We normally factor out the 93. You can do later, you can do older, but I don't recommend earlier as you're doing that. But we do like to say planning horizon because what we want to do, I know this sounds horrible, but if you're going to retire early, I want to say what happens if you have an early death in retirement. How does that impact a plan? And we'll go and add Mike in here in a second. But let's kind of go through and do healthcare costs because I think that's a big piece of the puzzle we've not factored in yet. And when we factored in healthcare costs, it looks like they're both going to need about $300 a month first part of retirement. Now they're going to need more as they kind of go through. But I think that's a little high at 50,000. They don't need that much. They're going to need $3,600 a year, not a month, in order to do that. Now, that's going to affect this. Like everything we're going to do when we add that in, guess what that's going to mean? That's going to mean that their plan is going to have less money at the end. And when we look at the plan at the end, we're talking about millions of dollars later on because right now they're underspending relative to their goals. So when we figure these things in, it is important to bake that in. And Mike has healthcare costs as well. And healthcare costs, what we're trying to do is how do we bridge this until we get to the point where Medicare is going to turn on, which is 65. Some other things that I think are going to be important in here that I think are really important to factor in is they probably want to travel. That's $6,500 a month. In my mind, that's not going to be enough for them to do everything they want to do. Like it's just not enough. That's enough to live the life they've always wanted to live. But once their daughter's out of the house and they've got a lot of free time, they're going to do things. So what if we had a vacation goal of, let's say, $20,000 a year? What does that do to their plan? Well, that's going to change the math, right? So when we go and hit refresh on here, we're going to see different numbers begin to populate. And we're going to see that, wow, they've got a lot less at that point because they're going to be spending money in there. Now, I might want to make that what we call a time horizon goal, meaning we need that $20,000 for the first 20 years of their plan. And then eventually they're going to get older and theoretically spend less. We also have to factor in a car. You know, you're going to purchase cars along the way and you're going to have house renovations. And maybe some of that's not baked into that $6,500. So I like to really, again, stress test these things and try to break them because what I want to figure out when I'm doing planning is how much are you going to need to live on, but I also want to understand what's your income creating capacity, meaning with your portfolio, how much income could you actually generate in retirement? I just sit here and just play around with this and break it. That's really the goal. And now we're at the point where, ooh, look at that. Now $3 million less, but we're not showing they're going to run out of money. When we go over here to the probability of success, that proposed plan goes from 100 to 76. That's probably not where they want to live. They want to be somewhere between 88 to 92. So what we're going to do is then begin to back some of these numbers off. And we're going to say, okay, maybe $7,500 is too rich, but what does $7,000 do? Does that give them the probability of doing it? And let's find out because I think, oh, look at that. Moved it right up to 84. My point around this is that there's no magic bullet. So here's what I've determined. Is retirement possible at 58 years old for them? Absolutely. Based upon the math and the numbers that I'm seeing projected in this, that's a distinct possibility and certainly something they can consider. But there might be risk if they have not fully developed exactly how much income they're going to need. And I backed a lot of this information out for the purposes of today's meeting because I really want you to understand how each one of these things will have impact. But let's go back over here because I think this is one thing that's kind of interesting. What if they wanted to work another year, just one extra year? All of a sudden they say, all right, maybe 58. I was kind of just guessing. I'm not sure that's exactly where I want to be. So we're each going to work 1 year longer. Not that long, like 1 year. Snap your fingers, it's done. And their daughter's probably just getting out of school at that point. What does that do to their plan? Well, all of a sudden it changes the math in a big way. Now, look at that. Still has less, obviously, but we can change a lot of factors on here to create more. I'm just trying to break the plan. When I do these plans, I don't want to show you pie in the sky. I actually want to break it because I want worst case. Because one thing I've learned along the way is everything we've planned for is likely to change. Oh, think about COVID. Those things happen. What happens again if we have an early death? What happens if we have high inflation? We don't live in this world where we're building these magical plans that will never, ever change. We live in this world where we expect change. And because we expect change, we need to plan for it in financial planning. So, to answer the question, yes, they are right on track to retire. They've done a great job. I give them a huge pat on the back. They've been diligent savers. They live below their means. They've done all the right things. But they are not out of the danger zone yet. And that's why financial planning is so important. And that's why running your numbers is mission critical, in my opinion. So there you have it. We've seen the numbers, we've seen the plan, and we've seen the possibility. Maybe this couple's story, well, sounds a lot like yours. Or maybe it just gave you some new ideas on how to approach your own retirement. Either way, here's the big takeaway. Retirement is not about having it all figured out. That's impossible. It's about having a flexible plan that adjusts with your life. And if you're wondering, hey, can I retire and can I stay retired? We'd love to help. At Martin Wealth Solutions, we build custom retirement plans that combine income planning, investments, tax strategy, and finally, peace of mind. Connect with us at martinwealth.com. There's no pressure, there's no pitch. It's just a conversation about what's possible for your future. And hey, if you would like to get a copy of our retirement toolkit, do me a favor, drop a comment below, type in resources or I want the free toolkit, and I'll do my best to get that information out to you. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Jim Martin, and I'll see you next video. Take care.